From the heart of Maine, this is the DuView podcast.
All right, and welcome to your June episode of the DuView podcast. I am your host, Du, aka Ryan Dumont, and yeah, guys, summertime is here. You're here, I'm here, we're all here. Um, Finally, some nice warm weather in comparison to last summer where it rained the whole time. Knocking on wood, but looks like we're gonna have ourselves a pretty halfways decent summer here, guys, which is exciting. We only get nice weather up here in the Northeast so often, and so, we try to take advantage of it as we get it and as it comes, but at the same time, it's completely out of our control because that's kind of how the weather and nature works. And speaking of nature, we're going to be talking a lot about the Maine woods and specifically the beauty and the fantasticness and the adventure that comes with that, and in the form of Acadia National Park. So this episode is going to be very similar to my episodes on Mount Katahdin, guys, where I take, or even Augusta, Maine, where I take a place in our state or my state, for those of you not from Maine, and I tell you guys about it. I tell you guys the history, the cultures of the people that were there, and whether that be indigenous or settlers coming later. That I give you guys as much of the story as I think that I can from my perspective. And so, that said, just to preface with you guys, if I do sound a little froggy at all throughout this episode, I'll tell you guys something. The allergies have been kicking my butt this year. I have struggled with whether it be pollen, ragweed, you name it. I probably have a problem with it. And yeah, so if I do sound a little throughout the episode, that's why. Not sick, thank God. Just the time of year where allergies come in and absolutely destroy me. But that said, guys, I just recently got back from a trip with my mom to Cleveland, Ohio. Had a great time doing that, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And for those of you that haven't been to Cleveland, and I'm just kind of unpacking a couple things here before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, guys. If you've never had the chance to travel to Cleveland or Ohio for that matter, it's kind of cool place. Um, Very like 1900s like esque, like where you had your industrial side along with like this massive like gothic building type thing, like you have like these old big like buildings that look like they should be right out of like like a steampunk almost type thing, from like the early 1900s. And that yet you go, across the street and you have, modern architecture. You have some of the older architecture with like the names of old companies that used to, use those buildings that aren't there. It's just like a cool place. The food is fantastic. And on top of that, you also, if you're a rock and roll person or a fan of music, you get to see that too, which is really unique in a lot of ways. Because the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is unlike anything else, any other museum. I mean, there's interactive stuff. There's a whole laundry list of different things you can do that they have for all the different exhibits. They go back and they talk about like the early days with the African American musicians really being the foundation of rock and roll, along with blues, country music, and like your Hank Williams. If you want to talk about a few white folks that were involved in that. But the majority of it was all, like African American musicians, like the Ink Spots and many others, like your Crossroads, Delta Blues type guys are all that made the foundation for rock and roll. Make way for the Chuck Berrys and the Buddy Hollies and the Elvis Presleys and all the people that we all know about. But that said, um, it is nice to be back home. I did enjoy my time traveling, but it's always nice to come back. And so, speaking of coming back and going on vacation, so to speak, a lot of folks this summer will be coming to Maine. Maine is also known as Vacation Land. We host a few number of people on vacation ourselves, and we heavily rely on tourism, which is no secret. I've talked about that on this podcast many a time before. Or really anybody that knows anything about the state of Maine would know that hey, yeah, like this is this is a little different here. But that being said, it's different in a good way. It's different in a good way. We do our own thing here in Maine, and that's very true with one of our many islands. We have a lot. If you guys look at the map of Maine, we've got a crap ton of islands, guys. And our coastline, if you stretched it out and made it into like a straight line, is actually one of the longest coastlines in the continent of the United States, I do believe. You may say that, Maine's such a small state in comparison to, California, but like I said, that's pretty much a straight line. Like our coast is like very jagged and weaves in and out and weaves in and out. And like I said, if you ironed it out with a big ass iron into a straight line, then it in turn would probably be longer. And so anyway, that being said, we have a lot of unique islands, unique places, and unique points of interest along our coast. Um, One of the biggest ones, obviously, being Acadia National Park. It's a national park, so I mean those hold automatically a new and unique status among anything else, even state parks and the like. So it's very impressive, so to speak here. And so, um, like I said, this is going to be very similar to my episodes on Mount Katahdin. Go check those out, or even Augusta, Maine. Go check, excuse me, go check those out as well. Because they really do a good job of highlighting another part of the state. Now, this very much more focuses on the coast because that's where Acadia slash Mount Desert Island is located. So Acadia National Park is an American national park located along the midsection of the Maine coast, southwest of Bar Harbor. The park includes about half of Mount Desert Island, part of Isle La Haute, and the tip of Schoonic Peninsula, and portions of 16 smaller outlying islands. Like I said, guys, lots of islands here in Maine. The park contains the tallest mountain on the Atlantic coast of the United States, which is Cadillac Mountain. It also features exposed granite domes, glacial features, U shaped valleys, and cobbled beaches. Its mountains, lakes, streams, wetlands, forests, meadows, and coastline contribute to a diverse landscape of plants and animals. Woven into a landscape is the historical carriage road system financed by John D. Rockefeller Jr., which we'll talk about in just a little bit. We can't get too far ahead, guys, because there's actually a lot of history that occurs before the national park is even thought of. Now, as I, made sure to highlight in my other episodes, we got to talk about the people who are here first. We got to talk about the native folks and or the Native Americans, as they, are widely known. But specifically, we have a specific, couple groups or tribes or whatever you want to call this association of folks. So our first residents. The striking scenery and diverse resources of Mount Desert Island have attracted people for thousands of years. The first inhabitants, Native Americans, were here more than 5,000 years ago and were followed later by the French and the English. By the 1800s, settlers were arriving in large numbers and engaging in fishing, shipbuilding, farming, and lumbering. The island became known to the world in the late 1800s when artists depicted its beauty in a painting. The rush to experience Mount Desert Island and the desire to protect its land had very much begun. The deep shell heaps indicate that Native Americans encamped in this area dating back to 5,000 years ago. As I mentioned, in the Acadia pre-European records are obviously very scarce. The first written descriptions of the Maine coast from Native Americans was recorded 100 years after European trade contacts had begun. Described Native Americans who lived off the land by hunting, fishing, collecting shellfish, and gathering plants and berries. Again, that's not a first hand account. That's obviously a second hand account of someone else coming in. The Wabanaki people knew Mount Desert Island as Pemtic, the sloping land. They built bark covered conical shelters and traveled in birch bark canoes. The Wabanaki first traveled to the island in these previously mentioned birch bark canoes to hunt fish, gather berries, harvest clams, and basket making resources like sweetgrass, and to trade with other groups of Wabanaki. They camp near places like Somes Sound, which is a spot that you can go and check out nowadays. Very much still there. Historical records indicate that Wabanaki wintered in interior forests and spent summers near the coast. Archaeological evidence, however, suggests the opposite pattern. To avoid harsh inland winters and take advantage of the salmon runs upstream, Native Americans wintered on the coast and summered inland. There are been many that have been two separate groups, one island and another on the coast. And so, like I said, guys, like some of the records aren't exactly the clearest, but from what they can tell from archaeological findings and such, that like I said, it was kind of unique that they uh, sheltered, used the coast and the lack of snow to, shelter them, and then enjoyed the bountiful, inlands during the warm months, like kind of like we do. I mean, if you think about it, like if you want to have the least amount of snow during the wintertime in the state of Maine, you live on the coast. If you want to get bombed with snow, you go interior, in the western part of the state or up near, like Aroostook County. It's just kind of how the snow bands fall. Like I think even back to when I was a kid, my grandfather lived in Booth Bay Harbor, and they always had less snow than we did being here, in Augusta and in central Maine. So that very much still stands true today. But like I said, there could be two separate groups of Wabanaki, and, we'll see how that comes into play later on with when we find it actually have settlers come over from Europe. So, New France. The first meeting between the people of the Pemtic and the Europeans is unknown, but a Frenchman, Samuel Champlain, made the first important contribution to the historical record of Mount Desert Island. He led the expedition that landed on Mount Desert Island on September 5th, 1604, and wrote in his journal, quote, "The mountain summits are bare and rocky. I name this Isle des Monts de Desert. Champlain's visit to the island 16 years before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock destined this land to become known as New France before it was known as New England." In 1613, French Jesuits, welcomed by native people, established the first French mission in America on Mount Desert Island. They had just begun to build a fort, plant corn, and baptize the natives when an English ship commanded by Captain Samuel Argall destroyed their mission. The French victory doomed the Jesuit ambitions on Mount Desert Island, leaving the land in a state of limbo lying between French, firmly entrenched in the north, and the British, whose settlements in Massachusetts and southward were becoming increasingly numerous. No one wished to settle in the contested territories. For the next 150 years, the island's importance was primarily its use as a landmark for seamen to direct ships. So again, as this is even prior to the American Revolution, guys, the kind of the no man's land of this area, and that was very true for colonial times. I mean, when you have Champlain do his voyages, very famous, up into Quebec, he discovered Quebec, quote unquote, for the French, and eventually made his way south, down to our neck of the woods, and again even dubbed the name, which kind of has stuck to today, as we see. But wait, there's more. From 1615, Castine developed into a major fur trading post where French, English, and Dutch traders all fought for control. Sealskins, moose hides, and furs were traded by the Wabanaki for European commodities. By the early 1620s, and in introduct warfare introduced diseases, including smallpox, cholera, and influenza, had decimated the tribes from Mount Desert Island southward to Cape Cod, leaving about 10% of the original populations. So as we saw, down in Mesoamerica when the Spanish came over, disease had a massive impact on the native populations. Same thing here, guys. Tale as old as time. Unfortunately, when it comes to colonial expansion, disease comes through and absolutely decimates these populations because they have no natural resistance to it because the diseases and sicknesses aren't from here. That was one of the major pieces of the Columbian Exchange, guys, was also diseases on top of foods and horses and all these other, important things that had to do with, um, Europeans coming to the quote unquote New World. But disease was also a huge part of that, guys, as we'll see. And if you've read any type of history novels, you do see and very much, in fact, that like disease is very powerful in terms of affecting, the local cultural communities. There was a brief period when it seemed Mount Desert would again become the center of French activity. In 1688, Antoine Lamet, an ambitious young man, had immigrated to New France and bestowed upon himself the title of Sieur de la Mothe Cadillac. Asked for and received 100,000 acres of land in the Maine coast, including all of Mount Desert Island. Cadillac's hopes for establishing a feudal estate in the New World, however, were short lived. Although he and his bride resided there for a time, they soon abandoned their enterprise. Cadillac later gained lasting recognition as the founder of Detroit. Isn't that funny? Little bit far away from the Motor City, from the from Michigan, not close at all. But I mean, as the crow flies, And you look at the Great Lakes once you get up into Canada, I guess, it really isn't that far away. Well, that's funny. Moving on to the 1700s, in 1759, after a century and a half of conflict, British troops triumphed at Quebec, ending French domination in Acadia. With Native Americans scattered and the fleur de lis banished, lands along the Maine coast opened up for English settlement. Governor Francis Bernard of Massachusetts obtained a royal land grant on Mount Desert Island. In 1760, Bernard attempted to secure his claim by offering free land to settlers. Abraham Soames and James Richardson accepted the offer and settled their families at his what now Soamesville. The border established between the United States and Canada after the American Revolution split the Wabanaki homelands. The Confederacy was dissolved around 1870 due to pressures from the American and Canadian governments, though the tribal nations continue to interact in their traditional ways to this day. The onset of the American Revolution ended Bernard's plan for Mount Desert Island. In the aftermath of the war, Bernard lost his claim, and the newly created United States of America granted the western half of Mount Desert Island to John Bernard, son of the governor, and the eastern half of the island to Marie Therese de Gregor, granddaughter of Mr. Cadillac, who we talked about, Monsieur Cadillac, who we talked about earlier. Bernard and de Gregor soon sold their land holdings to non residential landlords. Their real estate transactions probably made very little difference in the increasing number of settlers homesteading to Mount Desert Island, however. By 1820, farming and lumbering vied with fishing and shipbuilding as major occupations. Settlers converted hundreds of acres of trees into wood products ranging from schooners and barns to baby cribs and hand tools. Farmers harvested wheat, rye, corn, and potatoes. By 1850, the familiar sights of fishermen and sailors, fish racks and shipyards revealed a way of life linked inherently to the sea. It was the outsiders, the artists, and the journalists who revealed and popularized this island to the world in the mid 1800s, however. Painters of the Hudson River School, including Thomas Cole, Frederick Church, glorified Mount Desert Island with their brushstrokes, inspiring patrons and friends to flock there. These were the, quote, rusticators. Undaunted by the crude accommodations and simple food, they sought out local fishermen and farmers to put them up for a modest fee. Summer after summer, the rusticators returned to renew friendship with the local islanders and, most of all, to savor the fresh salt air, beautiful scenery, and relaxed pace. Soon the villagers' cottages and fishermen's huts were filled to overflowing, and by 1880, 30 hotels competed for vacationers' dollars. Tourism was becoming a major industry in this state. And so that kind of sets us up. I'm going to take a quick break, and kind of sets us up for what is to come here, guys. Like I said, if you're not familiar with the Hudson River School and some of these other groups, look them up because they did some incredible artwork, guys. Like really incredible stuff. And I mean, a lot of it is very like surreal. It's not like it's kind of what I like to call like almost like idealized in a lot of ways. I mean, it's like you have the lights just right and everything like that, and you have these beautiful looking deer in the pictures and everything like that. Like you can kind of tell what I'm talking about, guys, when you go and you look at like some of these paintings. But that spared no expense, I guess, with the Acadian side of things too, because on Mount Desert Island you do have a lot of beautiful nature and things along those lines, which does allow for folks like this to come in and really kind of popularize the area in a lot of ways. That's kind of I feel like how a lot of Maine got its tourism. People just started coming and coming and coming and coming, and they take pictures, they paint pictures, whatever. Eventually, once photography catches up, and then people find out about this beautiful little spot that's not quite as far away. For a lot of people to travel from like New York City and some of these other in Boston and some of these other places, as we'll see once we get into the 1900s. But that said, as the turn of the century quickly approached, the writing was kind of on the wall for the area, and that tourism would be its major moneymaker. You go down there today, yeah, there's still shipbuilders, guys. There's still farmers, and on a much smaller scale, and there's still commercial fishing, commercial lobstering, and the like. But definitely the majority of money that is made in the Bar Harbor, Mount Desert Island, Acadia National Park area, is tourism, is lodging, is restaurants, um, is that type of stuff. Relies on people to come from afar and spend money. And that was a real big problem when COVID rolled around, guys. Like I said, as much as they saw hardships back in the day, you really saw a lot of hardships in that area just a few years ago. Getting back to our story, though, for the select handful of Americans, the 1880s and the gay 90s meant affluence on a scale without precedent. Mount Desert Island, still remote from the cities of the East, became a retreat for the prominent people of their times. The Rockefellers, Morgans, Fords, Vanderbilts, Carnegies, and Astors chose to spend their summers here. Not content with the simple lodgings then available, these families transformed the landscape of Mount Desert Island with elegant estates, um, jokingly called cottages. Luxury, refinement, and large gatherings replaced buckboard rides, picnics, and day long hikes of an earlier era. For more than 40 years, the wealthy had held sway on Mount Desert Island. But the Great Depression and World War II marked the end of such extravagance. In 1901, uh, disturbed by the growing development of the Bar Harbor area and the dangers he foresaw in the newly invested gasoline power portable sawmill, gentlemen by the name of Dorr and others established the Hancock County Trustees of Public Reservations. The corporation, whose sole purpose was to preserve the land for perpetual use of the public, acquired 6,000 acres by 1913. Dorr offered the land to the federal government, and in 1916, President Woodrow Wilson announced the creation of the Sieur de Monts National Monument. Dorr continued to acquire property and renewed his efforts to obtain full national park status for his beloved preserve. In 1919, President Wilson signed the act establishing Lafayette National Park. Dorr, whose labor constituted the greatest of one-man shows in the history of land conservation, end quote, became the first park superintendent. However, in 1929, the name changed to Acadia National Park as we know it today. Now, once the U.S. government gets involved, guys, it changes Acadia to what we really know it as today. And I said, like I was saying, after the Great Depression and the Second World War and another event which we'll talk about momentarily, it really has a huge effect on basically like those who had their quote unquote cottages, the uber wealthy of America, had their little, had their little big homes, their massive homes, guys. If you look at online at some of the pictures of these places, they're bigger than houses that you or I will ever live in. But that said, it did have a huge impact on the area and what there is for access in the area and a lot of other things, which I'll explain here in just a second. Well, the U.S. government focused on the establishment and protections of the park. John D. Rockefeller Jr., a wealthy Mount Desert Island landowner, had plans of his own. From 1915 to 1933, Rockefeller dedicated his efforts and resources to the development of his vast island estate and the establishment of carriage paths. Originally intended as a diversion for guests and dignitaries, Rockefeller developed more than 50 miles of trail to provide carriage and horseback access to the island's remote beauty. He spared no expense and constructed 17 arched granite bridges to achieve this vision. In 1930, Rockefeller commissioned Beatrix Farrand to design planting and landscaping plans for the carriage paths. The results show Rockefeller's and Farrand's remarkable foresight. Still evident today in this beautiful, well-maintained trails, details like hand-cut granite coping stones that protect travelers from steep roadside embankments still stand as testaments to their long-term vision. However, this is where some things had been going well, but however, this is guys where the tragedy, our first set of tragedy strikes. So, beginning on October 17th, 1947, more than 10,000 acres of Acadia National Park burned in a fire that also destroyed an additional 7,000 acres of Mount Desert Island outside of the park. The fire began along Crooked Road, West Hulls Cove, northwest of Bar Harbor. The forest fire was one of a series of fires that consumed much of Maine's forest in a dry year. The fire burned until November 14th and was fought by the Coast Guard, Army Air Corps, Navy, local residents, National Park Service employees from around the country. 67 of the historic summer cottages of Millionaire's Row, along with 170 other homes and 5 hotels, were destroyed. Restoration of the park was substantially supported by the Rockefeller family. Regrowth has occurred naturally with new deciduous forests consisting of birch and aspen, enhancing the colors of the autumn foliage, adding diversity to the tree populations, and providing for the eventual regeneration of the spurs and fir forests. Now, this had a massive impact, guys, and you can still kind of see if you go down to Acadia today, where some of these impacts were really hard felt. You can see in certain areas where things are like, yeah, there's been regrowth, but you can kind of tell this should be more dense than it was, or some stuff like that, guys. And so the really unique thing there was just being able to being able to have people have access to the park again and everything like that. And so um which basically allowed for the park to continue through the 20th century and into today, which kind of brings us up to a little bit more of the modern age. But like I said, without the Rockefellers and people like that, like, this place would not be there. And so, as much as we say, eat the rich and stuff like that. I guess in certain in this one circumstance, again, he was also getting some personal gain out of it, but also understood that we needed to protect the beauty. So it's one of those types of things. It's like having some millionaires and billionaires that are mindful of the environment and doing the right thing type of stuff, investing in the places that you find beautiful. So I don't know. That's just like kind of a unique factor to this story, guys. Like talking about the Rockefellers and stuff, which ironically they made all their money off of oil. So it's like, well, you know what I mean? I guess it's all a trade off, guys. But in the 20th century and today, in 1986, local residents established conservation nonprofit Friends of Acadia, dedicated to volunteer work and ongoing stewardship. The really cool thing about this park, guys, is that they, at least in years past, I know volunteerism is down all over the place, but at least in years past, they always had a lot of, a lot of folks that would either donate or give time or whatever. You always saw, between, obviously the paid staff, but they also had other people, Friends of Acadia doing a lot. You see them sponsoring events down in the Ellsworth, Bar Harbor area, et cetera, and so forth. So it's really kind of cool to see, the people of the area also step up to really invest in what they have. And in 1995, rehab of the park's extensive carriage road system, which was obviously, like I said, stated previously created by philanthropist John D. Rockefeller, from 1913 to 1940 begins. That has since been obviously completed. In 2016, Acadia marks its centennial with a year of special events and programs, which is tremendous. Like I said, we are the Maine's national park is well over 100 years old now, and is, I mean, visited by millions and millions of people every year. And what makes it so attractive, I guess, is the word I'm looking for, guys. What makes it so attractive to go to Acadia and to go to the park specifically is it's so diverse, guys. Just because it's on the coast, it's not all just like seagulls and whatever. There's a very very heavy diversity of life, which I'll kind of get into, you guys. So the sea meets land at Acadia, and life thrives from shore to summit. The Arctic black crowberry grows next to the more temperate butchberry. Songs of wood warblers fill the forests, and a green snake basks in the sun. Mammals, from the little brown bat to the white-tailed deer, also add to Acadia's diversity of life. In the tide pools, pockets of rocky shore trap pools of water as the tide recedes. Amazing plants, creatures, including starfish, survive in the inhospitable worlds between the tides. In the woodlands, spruce fir forests dominated the park until 1947, when I mentioned that 10,000 acres burned. Sun loving birch, aspen, and oak grew in the wake. The fire brought more variety to the woodlands and the wildlife the new growth attracts, like the red fox. Lakes, glacially carved valleys cradle freshwater lakes in Acadia's interior. Here, waterfowl, amphibians, reptiles, and numerous invertebrates thrive, and humans may find some reflection. And finally, and probably most popular, are the mountains. The mountains are not nearly as barren as Samuel Champlain once described. They are home to woodlands and many plant species. Peregrine falcons nest on some of the highest cliffs of the park and call their faces home, which is unique to a lot of Acadia. You can climb a lot of different um, difficulty of terrain. They have, like the Beehive, which I've talked about on the podcast before, guys, in one of the mountains. You can climb up iron rungs and go right up the face of the mountain, more or less. And the same thing with the precipice, where the peregrine falcons hang out. Sometimes you can't even climb the precipice, guys, because of the falcons. They respect the conservation efforts that far with that. And so yeah, it's a really unique place. You can also, by the Beehive, go down to Sand Beach, where if you want to just like put out a beach towel and have a normal beach day, you can do that. While at the same time, you can, drive just a short distance down the park road and go to what's called Thunder Hole. Thunder Hole is like a natural carved out, under rock water cave that when the ocean comes in, it creates, some action in the void under the cave and creates, these very loud thundering noises, which held a very important place in the Native American history, but also as a major tourist attraction today. People love that. I think if I remember correctly, you used to be able to even like go in it, but then too many people died or got stuck in there when the tide would change or something like that. But they used to find arrowheads and stuff like that in there, if I remember correctly from stories. And so, um, that said, you also have the Jordan Pond House, where you can, go and take a break after, look at the gardens and stuff like that. It's kind of like I said, it's unique. It's almost like at some points of Acadia, it almost feels like you have stepped back in time to like 1940, and you're enjoying like a very rustic vacation, to the Maine. Woods and the carriage trails too. On top of that, are very impressive. You can hop on that and ride your bike for miles or walk for miles. I know, like from when I was in Boy Scouts, we did a 50-mile hike as part of, or 20-mile hike as part of one of the hiking merit badge. And in turn, the group for my troop, I actually had to miss it because of something that was going on at the time. But I ended up having to make it up and do it on a rail bed somewhere else. But they actually did their big hike at Acadia using all the different trails and stuff that were there to complete that, because it's hard to hike a straight line 20 miles or whatever it is in a day. So that said, though, guys, it's a very diverse park. You even have the most famous like Bubble Rock, the bubbles that you can hike. And there's so many more mountains and other things too, guys, that I haven't. Cadillac, you can drive to the top of or hike. Very famous for watching sunrise and sunset, as well as sometimes they will have like astronomers and stuff like that, and people, amateur and professional, come out with massive telescopes, and you can see Jupiter. You can see some stuff that you've never seen before, because this, like the light pollution isn't overbearing up there because you're so high up. Everybody's like, well, isn't Mount Washington the highest mountain? But no, we're talking about on the coastline, guys, directly, and Cadillac is literally right on the water, as close as you can get to without actually touching the water. You know what I mean? And so that area is really cool. There's a weather station up there, that they keep an eye on things. And on top of that, like I said, the bubbles. Like I said, always see there's a picture of me and my friends trying to push it off. I think when we were maybe 11. Like I said, Acadia is a place that like has really exploded in popularity since COVID, and in a couple of years prior to COVID. A lot of people go there. It's very accessible, and on top of that, it's very tourism friendly. Being in the Bar Harbor area, I mean, people love being down there. It's hard to get around. So like I've talked about, sometimes it's hard to get around. Sometimes, but they've added bus systems and things like that to help with the flow of traffic. Which I will say very high things about the bus system. Like when I went out to the Grand Canyon, like that, how they have things set out there to shuttle people around is fantastic. And so when it's implemented properly, it can really be an effective way to help. But it is really worth your time if you've never been. You know what I mean, guys? Like if you're from Massachusetts and you've never been to Acadia National Park, you take a trip up some weekend. It's worth your time. It really is. And it's not just open. I mean, like, yeah, the park's officially open in like the warm months, but there are areas that are for use like in the off season. Famously, I can even think of one time we stayed actually in Bar Harbor for New Year's, and this is a great story I look back, or a great time I look back on very fondly in my childhood. But we have always frequented that area, my family and our family friends, whether it be hiking or just hanging out. Good friends of ours worked in the hospitality industry there. for many years and is now the head of food and drink for a major resort down in Florida. So really got like a firsthand experience of the the Bar Harbor thing, and also family friend of ours always takes his he takes like a sabbatical in the early spring, and he takes his sabbatical up to the Acadia area. So, like I said, we've spent a lot of time, myself included. I've spent, I guess, I should say, I've spent a lot of time over there in my younger years. Not so much since I've come back from college and everything like that. I've been once or twice, but that said, like I said, the area has changed a lot too, and COVID and other things are probably to blame for that. But anyway, we were down there for New Year's Eve, New Year's, to celebrate the new year, the ringing in the new year. And so we had some time, and we were staying at a bed and breakfast type place. Everybody that was, there on the trip was all staying in the same building. But things are so slow in Bar Harbor, and things are very seasonal in that respect, so that to the point where you can even, like, we laid, there's a picture of us somewhere of us laying in the middle of Main Street, or whatever the main street is, the main drag in Bar Harbor. That's how few people there are. There's a handful of places open to eat, and yeah, you just try to find what you can. But New Year's Eve day, we decided to go for a hike. And I believe it is Eagle Lake. There's a loop around Eagle Lake, which is quite further than a young person might expect. And that was exactly me at the time. It had snowed the night before. So we were, a few of us were trudging. The younger ones, there were three or four of us that were, like kid age, or teenager age, depending, because there was quite an age spread between all the different kids that were there. But that said, though, it was like a 10-mile loop or something like that, and it was a miserable experience if you think about little kid walking around in, like, snow boots for multiple miles. And so just when I thought we were gonna get back to the cars, have no problem. It had been a full excursion, guys. I was tired. I was hurting, and then I look over to my right, and one of my friends went through the ice. I guess there were these little streams that went along the side of the trail that we didn't know about because it was all snow covered. He stepped and went right through. So he was all wet, and it was cold out. It's wintertime. So they were rushing him back to the car. And then I'm walking along, and then I fall through I think I'm almost up to my waist with the ice. Again, we weren't on the lake, guys. We were just like, there were some drainage runoff areas that you were walking over thinking it was the trail. And guess what? It wasn't the trail. So I fell through and ended up getting soaked, like I said, up to like my, at least up to my knee, if not higher. And again, when it's wintertime, it's cold out, you're like, holy crap, we got to go. And so all I can remember is the tail end of this miserable hike is people rushing the two of us to the car to get us warm and whatever. But then uh, it with a great sense of humor. Our family friend wrote like a letter, to all of us that were on the trip, describing the excursion, and he included a map with the actual route and noted like where his son Drew fell in, where I fell in, and like along the trail, and it was actually quite humorous. And we ended up all seeing each other again at a event in, I believe, August of that year for a graduation party for one of the folks' kids that was on the trip with us, and it was just. It was too funny. I go, yeah, I still got the map. I still got this. I still got that. And at the time, I had it hung up in my room, and look back at that fondly. While the hike itself was a pain in the ass, the whole experience down in that area was a lot of fun. That's why I don't do a lot of winter hiking, guys. It was scarred early, and the joke was, oh, it's just another 5 minutes around the corner. And after a lot of 5 minutes, you come to realize there's a lot more than 5 minutes left to this hike. So it was a good experience all in all, but it was a pain in the ass, to be honest with you guys. But that said, I would highly recommend checking out the Acadia National Park, Bar Harbor, Mount Desert Island in general, because there's a lot more on Mount Desert Island than just the national park, guys. There's a bunch of little coastal towns that are incredibly cute, incredibly photogenic, and also just really interesting places with a lot of interesting people living there. So take a trip, hop in your car, go someplace new, check it out, try it out, grab a lobster, have a lobster roll when you're down there, because you can't go wrong with the food, guys. Like I said, just about everywhere is good. Bar Harbor is great. Just a pain in the ass to get around sometimes, with the traffic and stuff. But hey, that's Maine in the summertime, guys. That's just how it rolls. It's tourism, we can't do it without it. So Like I said, guys, that has been the story, or my version of the story of Acadia National Park. Like I said, it's definitely a worthwhile place to visit, and highly recommend everybody, if they get the opportunity to do so, to take it. And like I said, you won't be disappointed. It's a beautiful place, and there's a little bit of something for everybody, guys. You can camp right in the national park. They actually have campgrounds that abut the park, are part of the park. So. Like I said, then there's a lot more than just on Mount Desert Island. Like, it's not just all on the island, guys. The park extends, to 16 other islands, and there's plenty of other hidden gems there, more than what I highlighted in this episode. That's for sure. And I don't want to, completely ruin some of these places either. So may have intentionally left a couple places out, just to help preserve the quaintness of certain things. I think that as much as social media and stuff can show us a lot of cool places, it also has ruined a lot of places too. I mean, again, that's funny of me to say, encouraging people to come somewhere, but it does, in terms of like just the massive, a lot of these places weren't designed to handle thousands of people in a minute. So it's just be patient when you go to some of these places, guys, with yourself, with the location, and especially with other people, because they don't give a damn. They're there for themselves a lot of the time. You know what I'm saying? So. That said, guys, I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Like I said, we'll be back at it with some guests for the rest of 2024, and just wanted to kick the summer off with a little bit of Maine, and really just kind of highlight one of Maine's premier vacation destinations, tourism destinations. Because, like I said, a lot of people come here to see Acadia, and you can't not talk about it. So, that said, guys, thank you all for tuning in this month's episode. I'll be back in another month in July with a brand new episode and with a guest. So that said, guys, I look forward to talking to you guys next month, and appreciate all of you that tune in and give us reviews and stuff like that, guys. Big thing, just share the content. DuView 207 on Instagram, the DuView podcast everywhere else. And like I said, we are your premier Maine podcast, guys. We're out here trying to highlight the best things. Look soon. The first DuView podcast music minute will be coming at you guys here in June. Local bands, send me your stuff so you can get featured, and yeah, we'll go from there, guys. Hope everybody is having a great start to their summer, and we will see you back here in July.